New York City has a housing problem. 400,000 homes. That's the shortage. Not in 10 years. Right now. Tonight, hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers are paying. Rents they can't afford, sharing apartments there too. Cramped in, or simply leaving the city entirely. So the city came up with a plan. All those empty office towers, sitting dark since the pandemic, convert them. Turn them into apartments, fast, cheaper than building from scratch. Kill two problems with one decision. It looked like the answer. Then, on July 7, 2026, something went wrong. At 235 East 42nd Street, the old Pfizer. Headquarters, the crown jewel of New York City's. Entire housing plan. 2 steel columns buckled. Floors sagged 4 inches. 9 surrounding buildings were evacuated. The mayor stood in front of cameras and used 2 words: nobody. Wants to hear about a building in the middle of Midtown Manhattan. Extremely dangerous. And that was just the beginning. Because in the weeks that followed, inspectors fanned out across the city. They checked 180 construction sites. And what they found wasn't one rogue project, one bad contractor, one unlucky building. They found a pattern. Cracked beams that nobody reported. Steel welds that didn't match the approved plans. Columns reinforced in ways that existed nowhere in the official drawings. Stop work orders landing on building after building. 222 Broadway, 753rd Avenue, 77 Water Street, across Manhattan. New York City bet its entire housing future on converting old office towers into apartments. And right now, that bet is coming apart floor by floor. Nobody was arguing the city didn't need a plan. The harder question was what happens when you tell a 60-year-old, building to become something it was never designed to be. In the next few minutes, why New York City's housing crisis pushed it into one of the most ambitious construction experiments. In American history, what actually happens when you ask a mid-century office tower to carry loads it was never engineered for, and why the system designed to catch these problems missed them, not at one building, but across dozens. If stories about the cities we build and the engineering decisions that shape them are your kind of thing, subscribe to GroundScope. This is exactly what we cover here. New York City has been running out of housing for decades. The city kept growing, jobs kept concentrating in Manhattan. But new construction never kept pace. Neighborhoods stayed low-rise for decades, protected by zoning rules that prioritized parking and single-family homes over the apartments a growing city needed. Then the pandemic hit, and the offices emptied out. And they stayed empty. By 2025, Manhattan's office vacancy rate had reached 22.3%. Nearly 1 in 4 office buildings in the most valuable real estate market on Earth, sitting dark. At the same time, a McKinsey report found the New York region had a housing shortfall of around 540,000 units. The math looked obvious. Empty offices on one side, hundreds of thousands of people who cannot find a place to live on the other. 540,000 units. That's not a statistic. That's a city inside a city. Invisible, unhoused, waiting. So the city moved fast. A new tax incentive offered up to 35 years of relief. For developers who converted office buildings and included affordable units, zoning rules were overhauled. Approvals that used to take years were streamlined. Conversion starts doubled from 1.6 million square feet in 2023 to 3.3 million in 2024. More than 12,000 apartments entered the pipeline. And at the center of it all, the project that was supposed to prove this concept could work at scale was a 37-story glass tower on East 42nd Street, the former global headquarters of Pfizer. Developer Metro Loft, led by Nathan Berman, had spent years converting aging office buildings into apartments. The Pfizer project would be his biggest. 1,600 apartments, the largest office-to-residential conversion in the United States. But this wasn't a simple conversion. The plan called for adding 15 new residential floors above the existing structure, 18,000 additional square feet per level, all bearing down on columns that had been engineered in 1960 for a completely different purpose. The structural engineers at GACE Consulting had a solution. Steel reinforcement plates, thick metal jackets welded along the length of the load-bearing columns, increasing their capacity to carry the new weight above. It was sound engineering. It was in the approved plans. According to GACE's principal engineer, Chris Behan, it was never installed. Not on the 19th floor, not on the 20th, not on the 21st, the floor where, on the morning of July 7th, 2026, the columns finally gave way. Just before 8 in the morning, construction workers noticed something wrong and called it in. When the fire department arrived, they found two steel columns on the 21st floor visibly buckling, bending. Outward under a load they could no longer carry. The floors above had sagged 4 inches. Workers evacuated. 9 surrounding buildings evacuated. Streets closed from 1st Avenue to 3rd. A formal collapse zone was established across 6 blocks of Midtown Manhattan at morning rush hour. From the street, through the building's glass facade, you could see it. A bent column, in a skyscraper, in the middle of New York City. Mayor Zohran Mamdani addressed reporters that morning. The building, he said, was in an extremely dangerous situation. Fire Chief John Esposito offered what counted as reassurance. Given the steel frame construction, any failure would be more localized than total. That was the reassurance. Localized collapse. By the next morning, emergency crews had installed shoring floor by floor. The building stabilized, the collapse zone lifted, streets reopened. Metroloft said the damage was confined to a small section. The floors would be rebuilt. New facade, new floor plates, new steel. The project would continue, but the Department of Investigation had opened an inquiry, and the Department of Buildings was already asking a question that couldn't wait. If this happened at the most high-profile conversion project in the entire city, what was happening at the others? The DOB didn't wait. Within days, inspectors swept 180 construction sites across all 5 boroughs, every project connected. To Metroloft, its contractors, and its inspection firms, the results came back fast. 65 violations across 38 sites, 18 partial stop work orders, 1 full halt. No imminent danger, the DOB said, no systemic structural risk. But the details told a more complicated story. At 222 Broadway in Lower Manhattan, a 32-story tower from 1962, being converted into nearly 800 apartments, inspectors found something that had nothing to do with Pfizer directly. In March, months earlier, concrete beams on the 32nd floor had cracked. Workers repaired them, wrapped them in steel, and then nobody told the city. For months, the damage sat undisclosed. When inspectors finally found it, the DOB issued a full stop work order. All work at 222 Broadway halted, not because the building was about to fall, but because the engineers couldn't explain what caused the cracks or confirm the repair was adequate without a complete review. As of this video, that order remains in effect. At 753rd Avenue in Midtown, a 1950s tower, being converted into 678 apartments by S.L. Green, inspectors found steel columns reinforced with welded splices. When they asked for documentation showing the city had approved those specific welds, the contractor couldn't produce it. The welds existed. The approval didn't. S.L. Green said it had already identified the discrepancy and was working to resolve it. A partial stop work order was issued and lifted within days after documentation was submitted. At 77 Water Street in the Financial District, a 26-story office. Building being converted into a 33-story residential tower with 647 units. Inspectors found workers operating heavy machinery without proper certifications. Orders were issued and later lifted after corrections were made. 4 buildings, 4 different problems, all found within weeks of each other. And in each case, the same pattern underneath. Work done that didn't match what was on paper. Nobody caught it until inspectors showed up specifically looking. Here is what the engineers say, not the lawyers, not the politicians. Structural engineers who reviewed the incident were direct. The Pfizer failure does not call into question whether these conversions can be done safely. A steel-framed building from the 60s, several noted, is a solid starting point. The bones are there. The execution is what has to be right. Joshua Harris at Fordham's Real Estate Institute said it plainly. These are very, very complicated surgical procedures being done to very old buildings. The problem isn't the idea. The problem is the gap between what the idea requires and what the boom was actually delivering. An office tower from the 1950s was built with a specific structural logic. Columns sized for specific loads, floor plates designed for open-plan offices, wide, uninterrupted spans. Mechanical systems sized for daytime office occupancy. Residential is completely different. Every apartment needs its own plumbing stack. To get that plumbing where it needs to go, you cut through floor plates. You create penetrations in slabs never designed for them. And in the most ambitious projects, you add floors, 15, 20, full of people and furniture and the concentrated weight of residential life, all bearing down on columns engineered for something else 60 years ago. That is not impossible to do safely. The calculations exist. The reinforcement works. It works when the execution matches the design. The inspector present, the crew on schedule, the paperwork in. Front of the steel and not chasing after it. The steel plating installed on every floor the plans call for. The cracked beam reported the week it cracks, not patched quietly and buried. The welded splice documented before anyone has to ask. The margin for error in this kind of work is razor thin. A missed weld, a crack that nobody reported, a floor where the crew fell behind and told themselves the reinforcement could wait until tomorrow. Tomorrow doesn't always come before the inspector does. And the pressure to move fast, to hit deadlines, satisfy lenders, deliver the units the city promised, creates conditions where corners get cut. Not always on purpose, but they get cut. The DOB says the sweep found no systemic danger. That is probably true. The city is not full of buildings about to collapse. But 65 violations across 38 sites points to something more uncomfortable than one rogue project. It points to a system scaled up, faster than its oversight could follow. Construction law experts say the effects will be lasting. Higher costs, longer timelines, lenders demanding independent structural reviews before financing new projects. Developers rebuilding budgets they thought were final. Mayor Mamdani has not stepped back. His block-by-block plan calls for 200,000 new affordable units over 10 years. $22 billion committed over 5 years. Conversions remain central to that plan. After Pfizer, the mayor said it directly, conversions are still necessary, but they need safety and accountability built in from the start. The investigation into 235 East 42nd Street remains open. The damaged floors will be rebuilt. Completion is targeted for 2027. At 222 Broadway, the full stop work order is still in effect. Across the city, dozens of other conversion projects continue, buildings from the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, being asked to carry loads their original engineers never imagined, in a race to solve a crisis that has been decades in the making. Buildings don't lie. You can approve the plans, file the permits, announce the units, and tell the city that help is on the way. But the steel in the columns doesn't read the press releases. The load path doesn't care about the housing target. Physics operates on its own schedule, and when something has been asked to carry more than it was built to handle, it finds a way to say so. New York City's housing crisis is real. The need is urgent. The logic of converting empty offices into apartments makes sense. Nobody serious is arguing the city should walk away from the effort. But the Pfizer building, the cracked beams at 222 Broadway, the undocumented welds at 750 3rd Avenue, they are all saying the same thing. You cannot solve a decades-old crisis by accelerating past the engineering. The oversight has to happen in real time, on every column, every floor, every time. New York City can build its way out of a housing shortage. The record suggests it knows how. What the last few weeks put on the table is whether the system surrounding that construction, the inspections, the documentation, the moment someone finds a crack, can keep pace with the ambition. If stories like this, cities under pressure, buildings under load, and the systems that hold both together, are your kind of thing, subscribe to GroundScope. We'll see you in the next one.